Good evening, everyone. I've been invited by Ajahn Asoko to offer a reflection this evening. I've never done this here before, and I'm realizing right now as I sit here that's actually feels like quite an honor, because I have memories of when I was 19 years old, being in Wat Nanachat in Thailand with Ajahn Asoko as the abbot of the monastery, and he was always the big man. Was a very good example, very inspiring example, very nurturing teacher to have. So it was interesting to sort of see how conditions change, our relationships evolve. Also being here with Luang Por now for, is it over just about a week now? Really appreciate how good the conditions are here for practice. It's very spacious. So far the weather has been very pleasant, hasn't been too hot. And it's very quiet. And it reminds me, someone was telling Ajahn Asoko this afternoon how it reminded me of Pujamkom. So, similar to Pujamkom with a lot more trees. Pujamkom is this branch monastery of Wat Nanachat out in Thailand that you can't imagine you haven't heard of it, with Ajahn Asoko and Ajahn Asoko as teachers here. But it's just on the Mekong River, on a very low but wide mountain or hill, very rocky, very hot, and very quiet as well. Also very beneficial for practice. So when we are in a place like this and we've got the opportunity to practice, what do we come back to? How do we use this time beneficially? We've got a good library with plenty of dhamma books. We've got good teachers here who teach the dhamma, who speak from experience, who can share their experience. And that's a blessing we can make good use of. But basically what we have to use as material for our practice really is what we have here and now. Whatever each of us is dealing with in terms of experience. It's very easy in terms of practice to read the books and listen to teachings and then use these very inspiring teachings, very lofty teachings, in a very idealistic way. Sometimes that's something we tend to do as educated people. We're born in this world, and from a pretty young age we go to first kindergarten and primary school, secondary school, university, and we're taught the skill of developing critical thinking, using critical thinking in a way that's beneficial, allows us to get a good livelihood. And thinking is a very useful tool in the world. But what this educational system does not teach us is how to put down that tool. At least nobody told me about that when I was in school. I had to run into Buddhists to hear about that. Buddhist monks. Meditators, basically. So these teachings that we hear and that we're encouraged to remember are here for us to use, and to use a little bit like we use a map when we're traveling, the way you use Google Maps when you're driving around. These days Google Maps kind of gives you instant instruction of where you are and what you need to do, but if you look at a map and study the lay of the land before you're traveling, you kind of try to understand where the rivers are, where the roads and bridges are, mountains and hills and forests, and then place to rest, bathrooms and stuff, and then you plan your trip according to what the land is like, where it's easy to make progress and where the obstacles are and how to avoid them, overcome them. And we need to do something like that in the practice as well. Some people come to the monastery and come very frequently, have a lot of faith, are very generous, enjoy meditation, sit with the monks, listen to Dhamma talks, are very inspired, and then they go home feeling really good, get on with their lives, and then when they need a bit of a boost in the heart, they come back to the monastery again. They have the good fortune maybe to live close to a monastery, so they can do this often. And this is very good, but sometimes I've been surprised meeting people who've been going to the monastery for 20 years, and I ask them, do you know what the 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path are? And they go, yeah, there's right effort. Is that right, Ajahn? Right view, too. Yeah, there's definitely those 2. And they can't remember any of the others. So you could say, well, good, at least they remember 2 already. But it's good to actually take some time to memorize these teachings. Because we don't always have the opportunity to be close to a teacher, to be close to a monastery, close to a Dhamma book that we can go back to for reference. Sometimes things happen to us in life and we need the Dhamma right there and then, in the heat of the situation. And if we haven't memorized any of the instructions, sometimes we just feel at loss. We have a vague idea of what we need to do, but we can't really help ourselves. And we end up in a bit of an emotional state, and then next possible opportunity, you rush back to the monastery and feel this huge wave of relief. Finally, I'm back here. Ajahn, you know what happened? And we tell the Ajahn our story, and we feel better. But it's really useful to memorize some Dhamma, some very basic Dhamma. What actually are the 4 Noble Truths? How did the Buddha define the first Noble Truth when he says there is suffering? What is it in our experiences that we can all relate to, as he is referring to when he says there is suffering? What is it? That's where the morning chanting comes in very handy. Birth is dukkha, aging is dukkha, sickness is dukkha, death is dukkha, not getting what we want is suffering, being associated with the disliked, being separated from the liked. In brief, grasping, attaching, identifying with the 5 khandhas, the 5 aggregates. Something as simple as that, you chant it every morning, If you don't, that's fine, but it's a good thing to memorize. What is the cause of suffering? These three types of desire. Sense desire, kama tanha. Bhava tanha, the desire to become, to be, to have, to possess. Vibhava tanha, not wanting to have, not wanting to be like this, not wanting to become. What is cessation, the third noble truth? How does the Buddha describe that? It's the abandoning of that desire, the cessation of desire, the relinquishing of that desire. And the rich one is the fourth one, the Noble Eightfold Path. What are the 8 factors of the path? And then you can take each one of those factors and delve into them further. So you start off with right view and right intention, go through the whole list, and then you can come back to right view and just wonder, what is right view? How does the Buddha actually define right view? If I wanted to develop right view, how do I go about that? And so you realize, well, when he's talking about right view, there are different definitions according to the different suttas you can read. But the most basic definition of right view is understanding the Four Noble Truths. So if I want to develop right view, how do I study these Four Noble Truths? How do I come to understand them? Right intention is the second factor of the path. The Buddha talks about right intention as the intention of renunciation, the intention of non-ill will, which you could also say is the intention of metta, loving kindness, the intention of non-cruelty, which is akin to compassion. But it's interesting to see how the Buddha words these things. He doesn't say it's renunciation, metta, karuna. It's all in terms of renunciation, of giving up, of letting go, of relinquishing. When greed arises in the mind, letting go of it, renouncing that. When ill will, anger arises in the mind, recognizing that and relinquishing it. If cruel thoughts arise in the mind, relinquishing that. And then you've got the triad that revolves around sila, right action, right speech, right livelihood. How are those defined? It sort of basically revolves around the 5 precepts. And then you've got right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. How does the Buddha actually define that? How can I develop those? How can I study them, understand them, recognize them? And then as you learn to look at that, look at these teachings, as you memorize them, what they are, how the Buddha defined them, it's not actually that much. You've done a lot more than that in school. Probably any year in school you've learned more than that, so it's not much to memorize. And this is what we call parinya. It's kind of the level of study, and it is the first level that the Buddha describes of wisdom, the theoretical understanding of the teachings. And it really functions like a map. So when you're traveling and you have a map in your hands, you can go anywhere on top of the hills here. When you know how to read the map, you can start recognizing on the map, this mountain corresponds to that one in front of me. The river here is here to my left, the road is to the right, and then you can start walking around and get a good sense of direction because you're following a map that corresponds to the lay of the land. And the Buddha gave us these teachings, we can memorize them, even just very basic teachings, and then start looking at how is that in my experience? Coming back to the first noble truth, birth, old age, sickness and death, association with the disliked, separation from the liked, not getting what I want. Can I relate to that from my experience? And so you start looking at your own experience and get up in the morning. You don't really feel like getting up in the morning. The body feels stiff. It's early. I just want to go back to the pillow and sleep. And you could just use that right there. Separation from the liked is separation from the comfort of lying down with your head on a pillow. Association with the disliked is maybe that stiffness in the morning when we wake up. And this is something as simple as this, the Buddha describes us. This is the dukkha that needs to be recognized. We need to make space for this in consciousness. Is that what I do? And then you realize, well, actually, most of the time I just get up and get on with things and go and hit the coffee because that's the first thing that makes me feel good in the morning. And all the unpleasant bits, until I get to my cup of coffee, I try to ignore and get past without paying too much attention to them. That's ignorance. That's ignorance at work there. Operating in a habitual way. We don't want to see dukkha. We don't want to experience it. And yet, it says good morning every day. And then whether you're living in the monastery, you're living at home, whatever you're doing, we have to interact with people. Some people we get along with, some people we don't really get along with, others we really don't. And they're suffering right there all over again. I don't want to have to put up with people I don't like, who are irritating, annoying. I just want to hang out with Ajahn Asoko and Ajahn Yaniko, and that's it. That's good enough for me. They're nice people. But that's not what life gives us. Life just dishes out to us all kinds of things. And so we can see how we can use these teachings and start looking at our experience here and now. And see, well, how does that apply? How can I recognize what the Buddha is talking about and what's happening right now? And that's that second aspect of wisdom, where we use these theoretical teachings that we've read about, that we've heard about, that we've memorized to some extent, and then we start using them and bringing them into the heart in terms of our experience. And that's also, so the first aspect of memorizing teachings, that's part of the practice. But the second part of the practice is where we really start bringing the Dhamma into the heart. And as we do that, we start recognizing that there's a whole bunch of other stuff in this heart already. Habits, likes and dislikes, preferences, moods, happy moods, unpleasant moods. That place is crowded with stuff. And then as we use the teachings of the Buddha and we start looking at what we have as our usual daily fare in terms of body, feelings, memories, thoughts, emotions, our experience of the world through the senses, we realize it's all there, but it's a different way of looking at it. And the difference between our habitual way of looking at our experience and this way that the Buddha is teaching us, the difference between the two is the point of view from which you're looking at it. Our habitual one, coming from ignorance, coming from grasping, operating from likes and dislikes, and usually following happiness and trying to run away from suffering, is all about me. It's about self. And that's why we call it self-view, Sakkaya Ditthi. And if you look at what happens most of the time, when we try to get what we want and try to get rid of what we don't want, we end up in quite a bit of a tussle with life all the time. Trying to negotiate with conditions, wanting them to be otherwise, not being happy with things the way they are, they're not quite good enough. It'd be better if they were otherwise. But it's all about me and how I'd like things to be and what I prefer and what I don't like and how I'd like to be, the kind of person I don't want to be, what I don't want to be angry, but anger arises and then this yucky emotion keeps coming up and don't know what to do with it. So sometimes we get angry and sometimes we're just trying to get rid of it because it's unpleasant, trying to throw it out the window, hide it under the carpet, get rid of it somehow, pretend it's not happening. But it's still relating to our experience in terms of me and what I want, how I see myself, what I am, what I'm not. I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm neither. I'm not affiliated. I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a human being. I'm Caucasian, African, Latino, Asian. I'm a Buddhist, I'm a Christian, I'm an atheist. And then we relate to the practice coming from self. Because I'm a Buddhist, but I'm new to the practice, I don't know much yet. Or yeah, I've been around for some while. When you sign into a meditation retreat, some of them ask you if you're an experienced meditator or a beginner. You tick that box. And it might be a reflecting experience, but then sometimes we find ourselves identifying as a beginner or as an experienced meditator. And coming from our habitual ways of relating to these things is all coming from self. What the Buddha is giving us is a way of looking at this that is not coming from self. It's looking at things from a different perspective according to what they are in terms of nature. I can relate to this body as a 49-year-old body, a male body, 2 meters tall, that's what, 6'7" almost, or something like that. I like to bang my heads in door jams and stuff like that because I'm too tall for stuff. And this is my experience of the body, and we grow up with these things, these bodies, and we identify with them. We like them and we can get really infatuated with them because a lot of the feedback we get from socializing is people tell you you're beautiful, or maybe they don't. Or maybe you like what you look like, or you don't like what you look like. When you're in the mirror, you always have the judgment. My face is like this, my body's too much like that, my nose, my ears, my hair, my whatever. And so we attach to this body, we grasp it because we like it the way it is, or we grasp it because we don't like it the way it is and we'd like it to be different. And what the Buddha is suggesting is, it's just a body. It's a thing that breathes. It's a thing that basically is either standing or walking or sitting or lying down, and our whole lives, we go through lives and this body is in one of those postures. It's made of elements. It's made of food. It breathes in and it breathes out. It gets old, it gets sick, it dies. When it dies, we either put it in the ground and the worms have a good day, or we burn it, it goes into ash, and we scatter the ash around a tree, throw it off a cliff, pour it into the ocean. We do something with it, but that's the nature of the body. That's what happens to bodies. And he's offering us a way of looking at the body that's not coming from self. It's coming from, what are these bodies? The Buddha has a very beautiful simile where he's talking about leaves in the forest, because that's where he lived with the monks. And he asks the monks, he says, if I take this handful of leaves and I burn them, do you care about what happens to the leaves? They're dry leaves from the forest floor. Burn them up, they go into ashes, and the ashes blow away with the wind. Does that do anything to you? And the monks are like, meh, don't really care, feel quite indifferent to that. And he says, well, train to relate like that to the body. Yeah, how do you do that? That's a challenge, isn't it? Because that's not how I feel about my body. I don't feel indifferent about my body. So how do we do that? And that's where the Buddha gives us all these useful tools that we can find in the 4 foundations of mindfulness. He gives us all these different ways of looking at the body for us to try out. Can I relate to this body as a thing that just breathes? And that's what we do when we sit down here. We do anapanasati. We watch the in-breath and the out-breath. And we can use it for concentration, for calming the mind, but we can also use it to come and challenge this sense of self, this sense of this is my body, this is me breathing. Breathe in, breathe out. If the body is comfortable, then the breath feels comfortable, but sometimes the body is tense and breathing is a bit tight. It doesn't feel very nice. And then you can see how emotions arise. We want it to be different. We're not happy with the way it is. We're relating to it in terms of self. And here we have an opportunity to recognize that, step back from that, and go, this is just a body breathing. As Luang Por Sumedho likes to say sometimes, nobody breathes better than anybody else. An in-breath is an in-breath, an out-breath is an out-breath. We don't have breathing competitions. And breathing is a thing that the body does. We can influence it. We can take a deeper in-breath, push it out all the way, hold the breath. But basically it's something that does what it has to do. As long as we're alive, it breathes. When we're asleep, and we don't have to tell the body to breathe, it just does its job. So can we start looking at this body in terms of that? It's like, this thing is a process that is following its own course. According to how the body feels, then the breathing feels different. According to exercise, whether we're at rest or we're climbing up back to our dwellings on the top of a mountain, we breathe faster, deeper. The bodies feel different. And then we get an opportunity to actually start looking at this body in terms of, what does it do? We can ask ourselves, how does this body actually feel? What does it do? How does it operate? And this is coming to this state of mind that's more inquisitive, investigative, curious. We're in this room, all of us are adults. We've all lived with these bodies for over 20 years. Some of us much more. And the assumption is, I know my body. But then when we look at it in terms of right here and right now, we've been sitting here for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour. Right now, how does it feel? It's different from how it felt when we just sat down. That felt one way, now it feels like this. It feels energetic, it feels tired, it feels awake, it feels sleepy, it feels good, it doesn't, it feels healthier. And because it's changing all the time, at any given moment we can ask ourselves, what is it like now? And we can have a completely fresh assessment, recognition and consciousness of right now the body's like this. It feels like this. And because it's constantly changing, the material is always fresh, it's always new. Every time we look at it, it's something new. But we don't usually relate to it like that. The 32 parts is also a very, very skillful way of looking at the body. The Buddha uses a very nice simile of a butcher and his apprentice who have a cow and slaughter the cow, cut it up, and display all the parts for sale because that's a livelihood. So before they slaughter it, any of us would look at it and say that's a cow. But if you're walking down the road and you come to a table or to a shop with all this meat and bones and maybe the hide has been cured and all of that, nobody walks up to all these different parts and says that's a cow. We look at that and we go, oh, here's some steak, here's some kidneys, livers, lungs, skin, bones, marrow, and we go through that list that we find in that 32 parts that the Buddha talks about. We don't usually look at the body in those terms because when I look at you, I mostly see clothing, skin, hair, and that's about it at this distance. And that's what we see of each other. That's what we see when you look in the mirror. We have no reason in this kind of situation to start thinking about flesh, tendons, bones, bone marrow, kidneys and liver and undigested food and digested food and that kind of stuff. We have no reason to go there. And because most of the time we're operating from likes and dislike, all of this stuff is not very interesting. It's a little bit yucky. So we'd rather not think about that stuff. And here the Buddha is telling us, actually pay attention to this. Look at it. So what happens when we do look at this stuff? Just for fun, just for the sake of the exercise, if we're sitting here, there's all this big empty space in the middle of the sala. So we can sit here and use our imagination and sort of start with hair of the head. I have less than some, but there's still some here. If I just imagine I shave it off, I can put it here. It'll be a little pile of hair. We all know what that looks like. We shave our head twice a month, and if not, we go to the hairdresser. The usual attitude is, cut the hair, pay the guy, walk out. And you realize what's fallen to the floor is not the same. I don't relate to that the same way as what's on my head. What's on my head here, just by default, is me. It's part of me. It's what I look like. My hair's like this. Black, brown, blonde, white. There's a lot, there's little. It's curly, it's straight. It's long, it's short. But it's basically part of what we perceive as me. We relate to it as self. When you've paid the barber, have you ever thought of taking that stuff back home in a Ziploc bag with you? Do you even care if the hair that was cut off your hair and falls onto the floor? Do you care if it ends up on a piece of tiling on the floor and mixes up with the hair coming off your neighbor's head? You don't even pay attention to that stuff. That is not me. We don't relate to that as self. We relate to that as dirt that needs to be swept up and put in the bin. And that's where you get to start noticing a body part in terms of what it is, when it's not me. And it becomes a very interesting exercise to start going through the different parts in an imaginary way. You sort of have a little pile here with the hair of the head, hair of the body, nails. Just imagine that you could absolutely painlessly pull all your nails out and make a little pile of nails there. Hands and feet. I don't know if any of you has ever lost a nail when you stub a toe and the whole nail comes off, but it doesn't look very appetizing. When you clip your nails, it doesn't look too bad. We can put up with that. But even that we sweep off, and if I clip my nails and leave my clippings on the floor, the next person comes around and says, that's disgusting. Who didn't sweep up after themselves? But if you pull a whole nail off, it looks even a bit yuckier. But never mind, put that on the floor there, next to the two other piles. And then imagine you can just spit out 32 teeth and make a little pile of teeth next to that. But every time you do that, before you do, just wait for a sec and go, how do I relate to my teeth right now? My teeth at 49 years old. I wore braces and stuff like that when I was a kid, and it put my teeth straight, and some people say I've got a kind of toothpaste smile, so there's that sanya in my mind. My mother told me to brush my teeth 3 times a day when I was a kid, so I've got good teeth and good health, very few cavities, 1 plumbing. So I'm just telling you about me, but whatever it is for you, look at what it is, and that's part of your history. That's your biography. If someone was to write your life in detail, that's you. So these are my teeth, basically. And then you just poof, spit them out, put them there on the floor. Imagine someone else's tooth there, or your teeth. It's a tooth. If you lose a tooth when you were a kid and one of your milk teeth came out, well, you hope the mouse is going to give you a coin, but other than that, what happens to the tooth you don't care about anymore. That's not me anymore. And you get to really appreciate the difference between self and not self. And you're looking at the exact same stuff. You're looking at this body. And you can go through the whole 32 parts. You can sort of take this liver out, and I don't know what it looks like. I've never done open surgery and seen my liver, but I can imagine what it looks like. So I can imagine just putting it there on the floor. I have a fairly good idea of what it would look like. You can Google it. This is what a liver looks like. So if I took it out and I put it there, it's like, ooh, it's kind of sticky and gooey. And in here it'd be pretty safe. But now if I go out near the neighbors and I'm doing my body contemplation there and I put the liver down by the roadside, the neighbor has 3 dogs. What do you think they're going to make of a liver? They're going to pounce on it and take it away. For them that's food. If they don't deal with it, maybe one of the vultures will spot it and come down for it and take it away. Or the ants will feast on it. And if nobody does, it'll just shrivel up in the sun, rot, and go to dust. That's the nature of a liver. That's what happens to livers. And then livers, they get diseases. You can get stones in the liver and in your bile, gallbladder. Livers get cancer. Livers get fatty. Livers get cirrhosis. All of these things happen to livers. That's the nature of livers. And you can have a whole pile of fun going through the 32 parts. You could actually spend like 6 hours sitting here and just through your imagination, go through all 32 parts and imagine all the different things can happen to any which one of these 32 parts of the body. And that's telling you about the nature of these body parts. Now I heard that Luang Por Chah recommended doing that while you're walking Jongrom. And so you can start at the beginning of the Jongrom path, look at the body, just have this general sense of, okay, this is me. That's usually how I operate. And the hair of the head, they're right here. And I walk down the Jongrom path, and at the end, turn around, put the hair down on a little pile, right there. And look at that. Look at that. Now it's not me anymore. It's just hair on the floor. And that's the difference between self and non-self. It's a question of viewpoint. It's the difference between looking at things in terms of self or looking at things in terms of dhamma. Dhamma is nature, so it's looking at in terms of nature. And then you walk back down to the other end of the path where you originally came from and keep that perception in mind. Hair on the floor, not me. And just hold it there. And really appreciate the difference between self and not self. And you turn around. What's next? Hair of the body. So you walk down the Jongrom path, hair of the body. When it's on this body, it's me. This is how I usually relate to it. You put it down, walk back. Not me anymore. That's what not self feels like. And you can do that with all 32 parts. The point is not to get disgusted, or that can arise, but you've got to be careful with that because sometimes it can really be off-putting. So it's more kind of a study just to look at what it is. The focus is more in terms of appreciating the difference between me and mine and not me, not mine, not myself. And if you do that, at the beginning you have to get used to the exercise, it's brand new, but as you do that, then you start feeling really light. You're putting down all this stuff which is usually associated with worry, with anxiety, with attachments, with pride, with all these complicated emotions that keep coming up, bound up with making the body a self. And when you put it down, that relinquishment results in lightness and happiness, in freedom from worry, freedom from anxiety, from pride, from arrogance, from desire to be like this, not look like this, to have good health, not to have sickness. Once you put all of that down, once you put the body down, all the worries that come with being the owner of a body are relinquished as well. And you start feeling really light. And then there's a whole other exercise when you put it down, you can walk away from that. That's the end of your meditation. Or you can reverse it and start putting it all back together again. And that's a very interesting thing, because it's very easy to say what's here is me. What's there is not me. But once you've developed this perception that all of this is not me, it's like this, and actually like a liver, if you really go to the butcher, buy a whole liver, cow's liver, pig's liver, whatever it is, and you bring it back, you don't want to get that on your clothes, you're careful how you handle it. It's a bit yucky. And usually what we do is we chop it up, put it in a bowl, cook it, spice it, eat it, and we can forget about it. Mission accomplished, we've had a meal. But if you have this liver and you start taking it everywhere with you, you start realizing this is a dirty thing, really. It's bloody, it's slippery. And when you develop that perception, you're looking at it in terms of what it is. And then you start putting it all back together again. I like to start with a skeleton, and then I can come and hang and fill out the skeleton and fill it in with all the organs and then wrap it up in the skin. It's very interesting because if we're still used to seeing this body in terms of self, we don't want that junk here. It's dirty, it's disgusting, and we don't want to be associated with that. And yet that's the truth of this body. That's what this body is. It's a bag of skin filled with unattractive things. So can I do that? And little by little you kind of tame the resistance. You tame that sort of disgust, that not wanting to be associated with this stuff that's not attractive. Because you realize, well, this body is actually quite useful. It works well. We can use it for benefit, certainly for practice. And when you've put the whole body back together and you've put it here, you've brought it all back in, there's a sense of gratitude that arises for this body being the way it is, operating the way it is. Even if it's not perfect, it's good. And we develop a sense of kindness towards this body, metta for this thing that's with us all the time, acceptance of the way it is. And then when it does get sick, when it does get old, and all these signs of change manifest, there's a sense of acceptance of them. Because when we do this exercise, we realize the nature of this body and of all its parts is to change, to get old. Sometimes they stay healthy all the way to the end, sometimes not. But eventually they cease functioning, and when they stop to function, consciousness is not associated with this human form anymore. What do people do with it? They put it in the ground or they burn it. Basically, they get rid of it. Maybe even give it to the vultures, they do something with it. Nobody wants that at home. That's the nature of the body as well. So these tools the Buddha gives us are really, really invaluable tools that we can use, but we have to use them. And really kind of find a way of making them work for us. So I took just one example, the 32 parts here, which I went into a little bit more detail. You can go through the Satipatthana Suttas. You've got these 4 categories which basically cover all of our experience in a simplified way. Body, feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. States of mind. And dhammas, objects of the mind. And the Buddha has offered us these tools for us to use, and it's an opportunity for us to learn how to change the point of view from which we look at experience, instead of it coming from self, a position from which we're always seeking gratification and happiness, and sometimes we get some, but most of the time it's tiring, it's a lot of work, and there's a whole bunch of suffering associated with trying to get what we want, get rid of what we don't want. And if we can learn to relate to this body, to this mind, in terms of just stuff that happens. The body as nature is like this. The nature of the mind is like this. We experience greed. We experience hatred. We experience confusion. And then sometimes the mind doesn't have greed in it. Is not experiencing anger. And the instruction of the Buddha is, know this, notice it and appreciate. Right now it's like this. If we learn to do that with an emotion like anger, like grief, like jealousy, like whatever the emotion is that arises, instead of saying, I'm angry, we go, oh, look at this is anger. This is what it feels like, this is how it arises. These are the thoughts that come when anger is present in the mind. These are the feelings, the memories that arise when anger is present in the mind. And then anger passes, and then you notice, well, there's no anger right now. Like I'll guess that in the room right now, most likely nobody really feels angry, so notice that. The absence of anger is like this. This is what the mind is like when anger is absent. And appreciate that. And the Buddha kind of gives us a list of various states of mind to look at and to appreciate the presence and absence of. And it's not saying anger is bad, you need to get rid of it. If you're angry, you're a bad Buddhist. A good Buddhist gets rid of anger and relinquishes it. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, know the mind when anger is present, know the mind when anger is absent. And as we do that, then we start realizing what's there all the time is the knowing. The anger comes and goes, and what you're left with is knowing whether it's present or absent. When we look at the body, we can know right now the body is like this, feels like this, and then it changes. When we watch feelings, we can see at any given point in time, which one of the 3 feelings is present right now? Is it pleasant? Not really. Is it unpleasant? Not really. Well, it's neither nor. That's the 3rd kind. It's kind of neutral. Just know right now, neutral feeling, this is what it's like. And by using this, we keep coming back to this. We're not changing anything about the experience. We're not trying to become somebody or something, trying to get something, trying to get rid of anything. We're really just bringing an attention to these 5 khandhas, to this body, to this mind, and asking ourselves, well, what is it like right now? What's happening with this body, with this mind? And then you realize you're operating. You're coming back to the present moment and looking at what is here and now in terms of what it is. And you end up with what Luang Por is always reminding us of. It's like this. There's no me, there's no mind, there's no I in there. So it's looking at present moment in terms of dhamma rather than in terms of self. The Buddha has another very nice, very beautiful simile where he says when wants to protect his herd from the wolves, cows, sheep, he puts them in a pasture. And the wolf cannot get the sheep and the cows when they're in the pasture. They're safe. A Dhamma practitioner brings his awareness back into these 4 foundations of mindfulness. And if we can come and relate to experience in terms of the 4 foundations of mindfulness rather than in terms of self, we're safe from Mara, from delusion. So I'd like to encourage you to develop this, memorize some Dhamma and then use it in this way to really come and look at this experience that is ours all the time and use these teachings to come and investigate our experience in terms of the teachings. And inevitably what will be revealed as we learn to look at our experience in terms of Dhamma, what becomes very apparent in consciousness is how our habitual way of dealing, of looking at the body and the mind are in terms of self. And you can't help but notice the difference in suffering. Operating in terms of me, mine, and myself always ends up with much more suffering than relating to this experience in terms of Dhamma. It's beneficial. It makes life more pleasant, lighter, brighter, freer. And we're literally just cultivating liberation. You know, there's these very beautiful descriptions in the suttas of bhikkhus who hear the Buddha's teachings and go and practice and they realize liberation here and now. And you read that stuff and you go, wow, so cool, I'd like to experience that one day. It's a beautiful image, and sometimes it remains an image. One day, way down the line, when I've practiced a lot, I will reach the end of the path. But actually, we can develop that here and now. Anytime at all that we remember this, and we come back here and now and remember, okay, what is this in terms of Dhamma? How did the Buddha suggest we look at this? And we do that and we look at it in terms of Dhamma, we're always coming back to awareness of the body. Our experience of the body arises and ceases in awareness, in consciousness. Our experience of feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, arises and ceases. And if we can see them as that rather than me, we're automatically stepping away from grasping them and making them a self. And where we land, every time we let go of that, is we land where we always were from the beginning anyway, is in consciousness. But instead of grasping sankharas, conditions that arise, change, and cease, and when they kind of cease in our hands, we're just so used to grasping out of ignorance and desire that we just grasp whatever arises next. We're always relating to our experience in terms of sankharas, of grasping, of attaching. As we learn to relate, we teach ourselves how to relate to this body, this mind in terms of Dhamma. Inevitably, where we land, the position we kind of come back to when we let go is we find ourselves back in just with knowing. It's like this. We're back with consciousness, awareness of how things are here and now. And you're free. If I pick up this bottle, I have to hold on to it, to keep it. Right now it's fine, but I hold on to it. After a while it gets heavy, even if it's just half a kilo. But the moment I put it down, it doesn't go anywhere. I can pick it up again if I need it, but I'm free from that bottle. We can do that with the body. We can be with the body and yet be free from attachment to the body. We can be with feelings, even unpleasant feelings. And if we keep coming back to right now, I really don't like the way I feel. That's in terms of self. But if we remind ourselves, but it is, whether I like it or don't like it, approve of it or want it to be this way or not, it still is the way it is. It's just a feeling that arises in consciousness. It'll end. We're not involved with liking or disliking. We're not involved with wanting it to be this way or wanting to get rid of it. We're free from feeling, and yet feeling may be present. States of mind as well, memories, thoughts, our experience of consciousness through the senses. So we can be, any given moment in time, we can come back here and now. The body is like this, the mind is like this, feelings are like this, memories, thoughts, emotions are like this in consciousness. And notice that consciousness. That's open, that's wide, it doesn't... Consciousness itself is just aware, it just knows, nothing else. All the rest just arises and ceases in consciousness, and if we come back to that, we can let it do what it has to do without getting involved. We're free of it, we're free from it. It comes and goes, we don't need to get involved. That's freedom. So knowing liberation here and now can be that final realization of the Arahant who knows there will not be another rebirth, but it can also be what happens every time we come back to awareness of conditions here and now. So I don't know how I'm doing time-wise, but I think I can leave you with this for this evening. I hope it's been beneficial.